topic of today's session is Families with Adolescents, Challenges and Emerging Issues. And discussing this topic are Dr. Amiteshwar Ratsa and I am Professor Neerja Chadha, Professor of Child Development, School of Continuing Education, IGNOU. Both of us are program coordinators of the Postgraduate Diploma in Counseling and Family Therapy and the Master's Degree Program in Counseling and Family Therapy. Let's come to the need for discussing today's topic. We just need to look around and we see that our adolescence, our demographic dividend, is succumbing to pressure. There is increasing episodes of depression, increasing aggression. So somewhere along the line, one finds that they are cracking under the pressure that they are experiencing, and therefore we need to provide the due nurturance, the due support. And hence we have taken up the topic today, the family being the primary milieu, the major pillar of support across the lifespan. It is important that during this crucial stage too, the individual, the child, the growing child is helped to cope with the pressures, helped to tide through the transitions, helped to grow into a happy, socially responsible individual. So before we continue, let us first take a look at who are adolescents. The word adolescence has been derived from the Latin word adolescere, which means to grow into adulthood. So simply defined, as you can see in the slide, it is a period of transition between childhood and adulthood. Definitionally, it is said to be marked by the onset of puberty and extends till adulthood. And hence, very often, the word adolescents and teenagers is used synonymously because the teen years, that is the age of 13 to 19 years, is included in adolescence. However, many believe that adolescence believes in biology and ends in culture. Now, this is the period when the child has attained sexual maturity and therefore the childhood has ended, but has not yet taken over the adult roles and responsibilities in that particular sociocultural context. This being the case, we see that while in the Western cultures there is a clear phase. Puberty has been attained, but adult roles and responsibilities has not been achieved. Roughly this corresponds to the teen years, and therefore adolescence or teenager, the word comes up. In the pre-industrial society, scholars doubt that this period even existed. In Western scholarly literature, you find a lot of emphasis on how adolescence is a period of Sturm und Drang, that is storm and stress, that is a period which developmentally is full of challenges and stresses for the individual. However, even in our Indian context, you find that in many rural areas, tribal areas, and even the low socioeconomic groups, many of them, the child with the rites of passage, that is when the child attains puberty, immediately takes on, assumes the adult roles and responsibilities. So it is not that there is a great difference in terms of time period between the two. The person often is earning, contributing to the family income, participating in the family occupation, and for all practical purposes has assumed, be it taking care of the younger brothers and sisters or contributing economically, emotionally to the family, has in any case taken on roles and responsibilities of adulthood, and therefore this period is well nigh not there in those strata. However, at the same time, in many sections, particularly the urban, middle and upper classes, the educated classes, and now even in rural areas and tribal areas, parents are increasingly postponing child marriages, in any case illegal, and parents are encouraging their children to study and therefore take up a vocation subsequently after attaining education. And so adolescence with the accompanying pressures and challenges therefore is a reality even in our society. In the Indian context, while it has been true that in some strata it is merging, that is childhood is merging into adulthood, but traditionally too this period was assigned a separate importance. Even our Dharma Shastras prescribed specific codes of conduct for this particular phase. And even as parents and family members, we do realize that individuals during this age period are different in terms of their characteristics. They are more emotionally volatile, they are more difficult to handle, and therefore it has been accepted that this period is somewhat different than the earlier period of childhood or the subsequent period of adulthood. And in our psyche, till date, these codes of conduct, the norms and values continue to be ingrained. And hence we find that the findings of the West simply cannot be extrapolated in the Indian context, because the individuation which marks the psyche in the West is not so in collectivistic societies such as our country. In our country, we can happily say that the family continues to play a major role even during teenage and beyond. And here in our country, in any case, the period of adolescence is in fact increasing in terms of duration. In the West, by the end of the teenage, every individual practically is on her own or on his own in terms of being financially independent, earning for oneself, taking care of oneself. In the Indian context, we parents rarely throw out our child at the end of teenage. We do support the child through the educational period with the college education and higher education. As it is, you find that till beyond the teenage and even during the early adulthood years, the individual continues to be with the family and be financially, emotionally, socially supported by the family. And therefore, it becomes a very vital stage in our context. Having spoken so much about the challenges during this period, let's first get acquainted with the developmental characteristics of individuals passing through the phase of adolescence. And for that, I hand over to Dr. Amiteshwar.
Yeah, the developmental characteristics, as just now Professor Neecha mentioned, have been derived from the biology to culture. We are talking about the adolescents, and when we talk about development, it is a generally one-sided process in all human beings and in all living beings, and so it is in the characteristic features of the adolescents. And as we see, the development will take place for physical, motor, cognitive, language, social, emotional, in all the areas of the child during this age. The physical transition from the child to the adulthood takes place during these 10 to 19 years of age. Childhood is generally considered to adolescence seem to begin with 10 years of age. Generally, we hear everyone saying, now you have grown up, please behave like an adult. And similarly, there is another statement that takes place around this period is, don't act like an adult, you are still a child. So the dichotomy which the adolescent faces is clearly seen towards his or her development also. So when the development begins, it begins with the physiological changes, hormonal changes taking place, like sexual maturity, appearance of the secondary characteristics, sexual characteristics, the puberty taking place, and then the ability to reproduce also begins. The rate of growth is faster at puberty than at any other time since infancy. During infancy also the child growth and development was very fast, and now again the development is very fast. The growth spurt is associated with puberty, and it is generally known as adolescent growth spurt, and at times we will see there are some adolescents who would have a higher growth spurt during the pre-adolescent stages, some would have during the later stages. So some would be known as early maturers and some would be known as late maturers, depending upon the growth spurt which was taking place for them. Then we come over to the biological changes of puberty. It leads to rapid growth in height and weight, changes in body proportions, sexual maturity. Further, sexual maturation involves emergence of primary and secondary characteristics. These are increase in the size of the sex organs, changes in the ovaries and testes, so that these organs are now capable of producing mature ova and sperms, development of breasts in the girls, appearance of facial hair in the boys, voice changes in both girls and boys, growth of armpit and pubic hair in both boys and girls. Sexual maturity in females is indicated by the beginning of menstruation, and sexual maturity in males is indicated by first ejaculation of semen, which is also known as spermachy. Prior information about the occurrence of these primary and secondary sexual characteristics is important. Nowadays, in many schools, these information is being provided by the school teachers, and school counselors. Such information would help later to stop the unwanted, unwed pregnancies, unwanted sex that the children might have indulged into just because of play activities or due to sexual aggressiveness. Then we come over to the physical health and nutrition, the importance of these two in the adolescent's life. We all know that for the growth to take place, the nutrition plays a very important role. It is important that what the child eats would be absorbed into the body. To develop a healthy lifestyle, to develop a lifestyle, one needs to follow the yoga, one needs to have good nutritious diet, one needs to have adequate amount of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins and minerals in adequate amount. In most of our country, we also see that females generally having iron deficiency, which is also due to the menstruation period and low absorption of iron in their body and not having adequate nutrition. Then we come over to the cognitive development. Over here, I would request Professor Nija to say something on it.
Adolescents are in the stage of formal operations in terms of their thinking abilities, which is the highest stage of cognitive development. Now, what does that mean? An operation is a reversible mental action. So, while younger children, let's say those in the middle childhood years from 7 years onwards, their brains are able to perform operations that is reversible mental actions in terms of concrete objects. So if there is a scenario in front of them, tangibly, in reality, they would be able to do a reversible action from here to there and then back. But they are unable to do so in a hypothetical situation, unable to visualize if that were the case. If something is presented verbally, they may not be able to handle it, are unlikely to. However, adolescents now can present to them a hypothetical scenario, an abstract situation. They still would be able to figure out how it would be from here to there and back, from this perspective to that perspective. So they are able to think logically even about abstract situations. They are capable of hypothetical reasoning. They are also capable of metacognition, that is thinking about thinking. Why is it that I think this way? In fact, if I'm thought in, so they are able to even detach themselves from their own thinking, view it objectively and be able to assess it, analyze it critically. So therefore one talks about the tremendous potential of people at this age. Their creativity knows no bounds. If we do not impose constraints and in fact provide them the stimulation to foster their cognitive abilities, the sky is the limit. Having said that, at the same time you find that something which was developmentally associated with preschool children, that is egocentrism, kind of makes a comeback. As you are aware, preschoolers are egocentric, that is, they are able to look at things only from their perspective. Show them a scenario and ask them how would it look from the other side, they would be unable to do so. They can only see things from their perspective. Now, while we say that at one level, teenagers, that is adolescents, are able to think even about hypothetical situations from a variety of perspectives, at the same time, the paradox of this stage is that very often they are caught up in their own perspective. Two common examples of adolescent egocentrism are, one is personal fables, one is imaginary audience. So you'd find that the adolescent thinks that the whole world is watching him or her, is focusing on him or her. Ask a teenager to go to the neighborhood shop to buy a loaf of bread, the person would want to get ready first and step out. Try telling that person it doesn't matter who's going to look at you, just go and fetch it. Sorry, it doesn't work. For that individual, that he or she is the focus of attention, not just vis-a-vis him or her, but vis-a-vis the whole world. They seem to think that the whole world is looking at them, critically analyzing them, focusing on them. Another such instance is that of personal fables. This is what is linked with the overconfidence and rashness of adolescents. They tend to think that pitfalls and weaknesses are only associated with others, things such things don't happen with them. Alright, that person can try drugs and get addicted. I will not. I am not weak. That person drives fast and hits something. I can drive whichever way I want and nothing would happen. So the overconfidence, the rashness that is associated is to do with this tremendous, again, overconfidence in one's own abilities, a syndrome termed as personal fables. At this age, one finds in terms of the psychosocial development that the primary dilemma that has to be resolved by the adolescent is that of identity formation, that is, identity versus role confusion. This is the primary paradox that has to be handled by the adolescent. There has to be an emerging sense of self, an emerging sense of identity. If that doesn't happen, then the result is role confusion, which can impact future psychosocial development. In this particular case, what is important is to realize our role in it. If we encourage the adolescent in terms of being consistent in our demands, then we are nurturing. But what do? On one hand, we expect adult-like behavior from the child, from that adolescent in terms of roles and responsibilities, and yet when the individual is trying to assert, we clamp down. You're a child. The person very often in our households isn't even allowed to express an opinion in any important matter, saying we are the parents. We are older. We can tell you what to do. So this is something we need to be aware of and take care that we don't do that, because at this stage the peer group is very important. During the adolescent era, it is very important for the child to be accepted by the peer group. So you'll often find a bunch of teenagers hanging around together, be it boys and girls, and doing similar things, because the need to belong to the peer group becomes very strong, and we need to respect that. We also need to accept that there are emotional vicissitudes during this period. Because of the physiological changes, the hormonal changes, there is emotional turmoil. The teenagers themselves often are unable to understand what they're going through, why they're behaving the way they're behaving. They at times appreciate they're being irrational in terms of their outbursts and yet seem to have no control.
As just now Professor Nija mentioned, we as parents need to take care of the child's emotional vicissitudes. Remember that the child is also growing, developing, the biological changes are taking place. The child is also getting familiarized with his or her own body and also getting at times little tensed and aggressed about it. And all this leads to various adjustments in the families with teenagers, which further leads to the roles and responsibilities of families with teenagers. And as we see from the slide also, the child is also ready to be educated, but at the same time the child wants to put his or her way down. So as adults in the families, as parents and as grandparents and older siblings, we need to remember that we have to give the child some say, because the child or the adolescent over here is vulnerable, but both due to physical changes, biological changes, physiological changes and the psychological changes, peer pressure that is present, and all this leads to impact on the mental health of the child. So over here the role of the parents, the counselors and the family therapists is quite important. It is also important to foster the positive and prevent the negative. It is important for teenagers to feel connected with the family members, particularly for the use and understanding of affection, sensitivity, support, and for a high degree of communication, which is important for the parents and the adolescents to go for a long way. Now I hand over to Professor Nija.
It is a trying time, and therefore it is important that to be emotionally available, have family outings, encourage the teenager to take up hobbies and activities, so that the teenager is not glued to the mobile and the internet and the computer and the laptop and what have you. It is important that the bonding happens when you are having your meals together. Please put away your mobile phones. Be there for the adolescent, so that if there's something to be shared, the milieu is appropriate, your availability is clear. And with that, we come to an end to today's session. Namaskar.
Namaskar.